You remember the kind of quiet that sits on a porch at dusk, the way the light flattens everything and you can't hear the neighbor's radio through a wall? Well, my story starts in that quiet, the kind that makes you think nothing big ever happens here, until it does. My name is Jonah Mercer, and the thing I learned the hard way was that a neighborhood association with a smile can hide a ledger that stinks of greed, and a memory you thought was safe can be moved like furniture without you ever being asked. I grew up in Cedar Hollow, a strip of modest lawns and older clapboard houses where my dad, a retired petty officer, planted a little bench at the top of our hill and stuck a plaque on it for those who stood when we couldn't. It was small, nothing fancy, but it was his shrine, and after he was gone I kept it up the way you keep a favorite coat worn, familiar, necessary. One morning a woman from the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association came by with a polite letter and a clipboard. Her name was Lila Thorne. She smiled like she owned the place, and she said the benches needed a permit. "We've had complaints," she said, and the way she said it made my palms sweat. That's when you first notice the smell of something off. You try to play it small at first, you always do. I called the county, pulled up the digital records on my laptop while the coffee cooled, and I watched them disappear not in a minute. Not because my internet glitched, but right there, the timestamp blinked, and the permit was gone like someone had dragged their finger through the page. I sat at my kitchen table and I remember thinking, angry and stupid, someone's messing with public records. It's not dramatic when it happens to you, it's almost boring. Paperwork, phone calls, a secretary who promises to look into it. Then you start seeing the pattern. Packages labeled for estate clearance, going out at midnight. Unfamiliar cars slow rolling past the house. A neighbor who used to smile now avoiding your eye at the mailbox. Mara, my wife, she's a precinct sergeant. She told me the obvious thing, don't make public accusations without proof, but the thing about living with a cop is you get used to how they look at the world, quietly, for evidence, for motive. I had motive, I had grief, but I didn't have evidence. That changed the night I opened a manila folder handed to me by Caesar, the HOA's former handyman, who'd grown tired of the favors for favors culture. Inside were shipping manifests, invoices with Willow Ridge's letterhead, and a list of pickup times from a storage unit tied to the HOA account. There were names on the manifests, names of veterans from 3 counties over, items tagged metal collection or service artifacts. When I confronted Lila at a board meeting, and I'll tell you, there's nothing like standing under fluorescent lights with your neighbors and realizing the entire room is shot through with people who either know something or are pretending not to. She smiled and said, "Jonah, you're misreading isolated transactions. We're doing estate management for elderly homeowners." That line was practiced, like it had been written down and rehearsed for objections. Someone behind her chuckled, and the chuckle sounded like a countdown. The plan to expose her went sideways quickly. I filmed a few nights with a cheap camera on my porch and caught a van leaving with a stack of boxes stamped with the HOA insignia. I handed the footage to a local reporter, feeling that warm, foolish confidence you get when you've finally got something to show. The reporter ran a piece that made Lila look bad for about 12 hours. She retaliated not with angry words, but with paperwork and charm. Notices about uncared property, warnings about unauthorized memorials, a sudden avalanche of petty violations aimed at my home. Then the day they sent deputies to my house with a warrant for stolen property, that's when things became something else. They found a box at my back shed, a box full of medals and plaques that did not belong to me. The papers showed it had been logged into our address in the county database the week before. Mara watched the officers take me in cuffs while I screamed that I hadn't touched a thing, and she stared at the stack of documents the evidence tech handed her and opened them like she was ripping a bandage off slow. Someone with access had planted those items. Someone had the keys to the record system. The shame was public. The humiliation was broadcast on the local news. I came home to a mailbox full of letters that suggested I should sell the house. It was in a holding cell, chewing time like a bitter piece of gum, that I swore I'd make it right. Vengeance is a messy word, and I'm not preaching it, but there's a kind of stubbornness you get when they try to take your father's memory and make it a commodity. Mara, bless her, didn't yell. She worked it not for me, exactly, but for the truth. She called every favor in her book. Caesar gave names. Janet, the HOA secretary who'd spent too many late nights in Lila's office, slid me a list under her clipboard and said, "Be careful." She was shaking, and you could see the guilt in her hands. The deeper we dug, the worse it smelled. The HOA had been arranging estate clearances for families who were vulnerable widows, retirees, folks who trusted them, and instead of cataloging heirlooms for safekeeping, they were funneling selected items to private auctions and collectors. Medals, service flags, framed citations, things you can put a price on in a ledger, things you can sell twice before anyone notices. Lila's veneer of community service started to peel. She'd been turning nostalgia into cash, and she'd learned how to do it with real professionals, appraisers who looked respectable and couriers who drove at night. The turning point came when Mara, backed by a federal investigator named Agent Lyle, helped set up a sting. They needed to catch Lila hands-on, not just on paper. That night, in the old storage unit behind the community center, I watched it unfold like a movie, the wrong kind of movie, because it was my life. Lila arrived with a clipboard and an extra pair of gloves, confident, like a woman who believed every step she took was a dance she invented. I remember her looking at me and smiling that calculated smile, and I remember the way she said, quietly, "You always did have a flair for theatrics, Jonah." I had to keep my face steady. The feds moved in slow, and Lila tried to shove a box into her trunk, like she was putting away the last piece of a set. "This belongs to the community," she said, voice smooth as oil. "We're protecting things people can't protect themselves." Agent Lyle, all business, read her rights. "You're under arrest for trafficking stolen property and fraud," he said. Her smile bent like a twig under snow. When they clicked the cuffs, you could feel this tremendous release, like the breath you get after holding it underwater too long. People cheered, not loud, but real. A few neighbors who had lost things, some who'd finally had enough, and Mara, standing in uniform with her jaw set, eyes wet. After the arrests came paperwork and hearings, and, yes, a lot of courtroom language meant to make human theft sound like a fiscal footnote. Lila tried every line she'd ever used at HOA meetings: community service, clerical errors, isolated mistakes. The judge had seen the manifests, the auction receipts, the storage logs. She had seen the faces of veterans whose medals had been laundered through a series of companies until they became anonymous. The jury took less time than I'd thought to convict. Yet even when the gavel fell, and we had headlines that felt almost like closure, you could see the fissures left behind. Neighbors who'd been friendly suddenly felt watched. Trust takes longer to rebuild than a bench. The county instituted new oversight, which felt good and technical, and oddly satisfying: new rules, audits, open access records. We turned the little bench into the Mercer Memorial, officially registered, with a security camera and a plaque that read more words than the original, because sometimes bureaucracy is the only thing that can protect memory. But the story didn't end on a tidy note, because Lila's case revealed part of a fabric that was frayed, not just in Cedar Hollow, but in towns where people outsourced trust to smiling committees. There were still missing boxes, still auctions with untraceable buyers, still the question of how quickly a small-town smile can become a ledger line. People argued over whether punishment was revenge or justice, and some argued loudly that we'd created a spectacle from someone who was, for a while, a pillar. That's what I wanted to leave you with: the discomfort that comes when justice feels like a slideshow for the public and not a healing for the people who lost something real. If you ask me what I learned, it's this: memory is fragile, and the institutions you lean on to protect it can be the ones that sell it back when you're not looking. It's also true that families keep each other afloat. Mara kept me steady by being steady herself. Caesar found his courage in the one place where he hadn't had it before, and so many neighbors who'd been quiet stood up to say, "Not again." That small-town heroism, it's unglamorous and stubborn and messy, but it's real. So tell me, was this about greed or about power? Was it a few bad apples or a system that let the apples rot? Drop a comment and tell me what you think. Did we do the right thing by exposing it? Or did we turn a community wound into headline theater? Share the story if it moved you. And if you've seen something like this in your own neighborhood, a committee that looked one way and acted another, say it below. I'm Jonah Mercer. Thanks for listening.